early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night, when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight." And he said, "But they told me you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said it must have been someone else and they got the message wrong. After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everybody their places for the night. I went to work in the control room, where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called in at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out and clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control room about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside of work, and we started talking about it and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone with a raspy voice and said, "Hello?" I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone just to make sure I had dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds, the person said, "Hello?" again in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello? Who is this?" "This is Taylor. Who is this?" the person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, "Where is Anne?" He said, "Anne's in bed. Who's this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home. And I took off toward the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello?" followed soon after by, "What the fuck?" rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked to see me at home. I asked her who was there and she said no one had been there. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work, and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and said, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone, and the person on the other end sounded exactly like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the fuck was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said I was sick and I did not feel like playing these games and that I was telling him to stop prank calling me, and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I found out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. This is a story I have never told anyone because, well, even I think I sound a bit crazy for telling it. Backstory time. Me and my then girlfriend, let's call her Audrey, went to go see a movie a couple of years ago. It might have been Transporter 3. We both smoked at the time and were collectively out of smokes. So, on the way to the theater, we went to grab a pack. Because of this, we were a bit late to the movie and never had the chance for a pre-flick cigarette. Anyway, we saw the movie and on our way out, a friend of ours, let's call him Mike, came up and asked if we wanted to join him for a smoke. As we walked out of the building, Audrey took the plastic off the pack we just bought, took out a smoke for the both of us to share, and tossed the plastic into a trash can. As we stood talking to Mike, a guy came up to us and asked Audrey for a smoke, and she told him that we were smoking our last one. This guy didn't take kindly to that and started shouting about how she's lying and how she has no right to lie to him. We offered him a "sorry, dude," and tried to walk away. Then things got messy. He grabbed Audrey's wrist and wouldn't let go, and started shouting, "What the fuck?" and such things. Now, I'm not going to let someone harm the person I love, so I stepped between them and grabbed the arm he was using to hold her. Then, before I even knew what was happening, I had a horrible pain in my throat and stomach. My coat was getting wet, and Audrey was shouting, "Stop, stop, stop." I also heard Mike saying, "What the fuck?" and "Oh my god." Then I started feeling what I could only describe as exhaustion, and I no longer had the strength to hold my head up. As my head was dropping, I saw the red all over my coat, and the knife that this guy was holding. My vision started going black, and sounds became muffled. As I felt gravity overcome me, I heard a single sound, coming from all around me at once, like it was the only thing that had ever existed. It was Audrey, calling my name for help. Just once. The instant after I heard her, it felt as though the universe began to shake. A mid-range hum took over my ears, and all the black became a flash of blinding white. Then I was inside the movie theater, next to Audrey, with Mike apologizing for startling us so badly. We were apparently white as ghosts, according to him. He then asked us if we would join him for a smoke, and Audrey quickly declined. We left the theater without saying a word to each other. I decided to break one of my own rules and ask Audrey for a cigarette when we got in my car. She took them out of her jacket and put the plasticless pack on the dash in front of me. I began shaking when I opened it and saw a single smoke was missing. Audrey let out the most fearful scream I have ever heard in my life when we drove past a guy walking through the parking lot. It was him. She insisted she stay the night at my house. When we arrived at my place, we turned on all the lights and just cried in each other's arms. I asked her about it the next morning, and she confirmed it wasn't all in my head, but that was the extent to which we ever talked about it, and I'm sure this experience is what led to the end of our relationship. Things just got too intense between us after that. About a year ago, my girlfriend and I went to eat dinner at Chipotle. It's in a smallish shopping area with a burger joint and payway neighboring the Chipotle, one of those kind of upper-classy type shopping areas. We pulled into the parking lot in front of the establishment at around 5 p.m. on a Friday evening to find an empty parking lot. There were no tables outside, there were no cars in the parking spots, not a person in sight, and even the lights inside the building were off. Completely confused, I took the car in a sort of loop around the building in order to leave. The only thing of interest was a single fire truck parked alongside the building, headlights on, but no emergency lights, and no one in the truck. It struck us as a little odd. Maybe a fire in the building? As we pull around the backside of the building and then finish looping around, we drive past the front facade of the building. Except this time, every parking spot is full. Tables are outside with patrons at them, food half eaten. There's people walking around, and the lights inside the buildings are all on. But the fire truck was gone. Mind you, it took less than 30 seconds to make a circle around the building. It's easily one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. More Adjustment Bureau than Matrix glitchy, but freaky nonetheless. The biggest glitch in my Matrix happened when I watched my mom pull out of the garage and leave to go to the grocery store. I watched out the kitchen window at 7 o'clock during a California sunset, with the orange tint overlaying everything outside. I saw the car leave and close the blinds, and then had this extremely odd feeling, It felt nothing like it before. I went back to the window and watched the same fucking moment happen again, in the exact same way. I felt like I had just burst all my synapses and got lost in some fucked up brain circuitry. When I walked away from the window the second time, I paused. I was spooked, but wanted to make sure that this was over. I couldn't believe that all that just happened, because I swore I saw her leave the first time. So, I checked the window one last time, and I was in a seriously dreadful shock to see the same set of actions happening the same exact way for the third time. I walked away from the window that last time for good, and went to my room to play video games. The whole time, I felt like I was living in an infinite loop of time, where I would never experience another hour other than 7 o'clock sunset in California. I didn't check the clock or the windows until my mother came in, 10 minutes later with groceries. The amount of eerie I experienced couldn't be spoken of. She couldn't have done all that and come back with groceries in 10 minutes, and I couldn't have witnessed her leave 3 separate times exactly the same way. A little backstory. I was a total idealist back in high school, so when choosing a college, I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending, so that I could strike out on my own, in a finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends my first semester. I mean, these guys became like family to me in a matter of months. One day during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college, he hit a bad patch of ice and got into a car accident, and was killed. It hurt like a son of a bitch for a long time, and I still think about him all the time. But anyways, a few weeks after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and as we were standing outside our dorm building smoking a cigarette, I felt my phone vibrating. And when I pulled it out, I saw that I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly, and then I answered. When I picked it up, it just went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again, and we never really talked about it. But for me, it was one of those someone's looking after me moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time and really helped me get out of the slump I was in. I have no idea how his phone could have possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will. But this was one glitch in the Matrix that I will be forever thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim, but feel free to call again. In 2003, my best friend had gone missing and ended up being murdered. It was a huge news story and tore me up inside. Back when it had occurred, there were some issues going on in his personal life. I was living a couple hours away. Anyway, my birthday was on June 15th, which was a Sunday. I was hanging at my friend's house in the morning of Saturday the 14th, from which I distinctly remember having a bad signal on my cell, always. I was hanging out at the time, and we were in front of my friend's house. I called my other friend, the one who was killed, that morning, asking him what he was doing and that my birthday was the next day, and that night we had planned to go to a rap concert. He said he wanted to come down, but there was some trouble and he wasn't alone. He mentioned he was with his roommate, and I told him they could both come down. Without giving too much detail, he mentioned he was in fear of his life, and I told him to come lay low at my house, and Monday we could drive back and go to the police. My friend, whose house I was also at, had chimed in, remembering me having the full conversation. My friend on the other end of the phone line said he would drive down and stay over. He never showed up. I called him on my birthday, infuriated that he had never showed up. He never answered the phone. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was very drunk, but something just didn't seem right. I got a call Monday morning from his long-distance girlfriend saying she hadn't spoken to him since Tuesday, and I told her to calm down and that I had spoken to him. Well, I got a call from his parents as well, begging me to go check his dorm room, which he had that roommate at, which they both stayed at the local university. I drove down with a friend I was getting stoned with on Saturday, and we got let into his place. He had 2 baby pit bulls who looked starved when we walked in. There was dog shit everywhere. We checked the apartment and it was a mess. I went into his bedroom and there was a suitcase on the bed, half packed with folded clothes in the bag and on the bed very neatly. This was how my friend was with his clothing. It was a 2 or 3 night bag. Something was wrong. Fast forward, he was missing for a month, and then, with some pushing, his body was found. I won't go into detail about that portion. I will say this, however. The FBI ended up telling me he was dead 2 or 3 days before the day I spoke to him. Furthermore, there was no cell phone record of the call, or so I was told. I can't say how accurate the body decomposition was, due to the body being in a field during the summer in a southern high heat state. The FBI was positive of what they told me, though. To this day, I know I spoke to my friend who died. My other friend, who I'm still friends with, can vouch for this. Apparently they say it isn't so, but this is definitely something that will sit with me for the rest of my life, in addition to the tragic event itself. This isn't my story, but my dad's. My dad was stationed in Germany in the 80s in the US Army, and every 10 years or so they would do what's called a winter reforger, which was basically a giant game of war, where 2 sides competed against each other, and my dad happened to be there during one. He and his buddy operated a tank, but due to some complications they needed reinforcements, so they had to stay put and wait. They got bored and walked to a small nearby town to get a bottle of apple corn, which is a type of alcohol. As they walked into town, they saw a young boy riding a bicycle. They stopped him and asked him the nearest place to get a bottle, and he gave them directions. As they were following his directions, they saw a bar with a bunch of people in it, but for some reason the kid didn't mention it, but they went in anyway. As soon as they walked in, everyone stopped whatever they were doing and stared at my dad and his buddy. Literally everyone, including the waitresses. After about 5 seconds, everyone simultaneously started acting normal again, like nothing ever happened. A little creeped out, they asked to buy a bottle of apple corn, however they refused to sell them one, instead giving them both free shots of it. After this, they kept insisting that they sit down to eat. They were passing around giant bowls of food, and everyone would take some from the bowl and pass it to someone else. But my dad didn't want any food, they just wanted to buy a bottle of apple corn, but they kept refusing, only offering shots and food. Finally, they got tired of it and left. As they were walking around looking for somewhere else to get the apple corn, they passed the young boy again and asked him about the bar and why they refused to sell them the apple corn. The boy turned pale and stammered, "You went to that place?" and immediately cycled away as fast as he possibly could. My dad and his buddy look at each other like, what the fuck? Curious, they walk back to the bar to check it again. But when they get there, the bar is completely empty, and the lights are off. They stare inside through the glass, and the chairs are all upside down on the table, with cobwebs everywhere. And the shelves behind the bar are completely empty and no longer stocked with alcohol. Then they checked around the whole area, just to make sure it was the same area. And sure enough, it was the same bar where only minutes before there had been a crowd of people. They then found another bar and bought some apple corn and quickly got the fuck out of there. To this day, my dad and his buddies swear on it. and they say it's the creepiest thing they've ever witnessed. In college, I frequented a trail in the Appalachian Mountains near my college. Each time I would trek further and further. I never saw anyone else on it, no matter how good the weather was, so I saw it as my own personal trail. For a while, I would walk to a large stream and turn back since it was wide and deep, and I didn't want to get my boots soaking wet. One day, I was determined to cross the stream, so I moved several planks of sturdy dead tree to make a makeshift bridge. I crossed to the other side, and everything felt subtly different. The air was different, the sky was brighter, and surprisingly, the trail on the other side was better maintained than the part I had come from. As I kept walking, I noticed a lot of old soda cans lying around, the ones that are more perfectly cylindrical, and wasn't seeing any of the modern-looking soda cans. I passed by an old cabin. It looked occupied, so I didn't bother investigating and went along my way. I kept walking until I got to a wider, deeper stream. I wouldn't be able to make a bridge across that, so I turned around and headed back. I distinctly remember the sky turning overcast within a matter of minutes. I couldn't clearly see the sky since the trees blocked a lot of my view. I had just assumed a cloud had passed across the sun, but when I got a better look, the sky was completely different. I was walking along a completely different trail. This is the craziest part. I looked over to where the cabin had been to find nothing but the remains of a cabin. All that was left was the stone chimney. I had walked by the cabin about an hour back, but there weren't any ashes. No smoke. There was a thick layer of fallen leaves and even some litter, modern litter, like beer bottles and cans with modern logos. I was dumbfounded and explored the cabin's remains for a good hour until it started to drizzle. I walked back along the trail, the old soda cans gone. The bridge that I had built was also gone. I couldn't see the logs further downstream. The rest of the trail was just as I had remembered it. I walked the last mile of or so of the trail in darkness and rain, guided by my phone, which never could get reception up in the mountains. So, that's my weird time-traveling story. I've made it a point to go back to my college town so I can revisit the trail and see what was on the other side of the second big stream. If anyone lives nearby, the coordinates to the trailhead are as follows: 36.145937, negative 81.703719. You can park in the rest stop. I have an interesting little story that I thought you might be interested in. When I was younger, mostly 6 or 7 years old, I can distinctly remember playing with a few of the other children in my neighborhood, doing things like drawing with chalk and playing tag, simple games that we played in our cul-de-sac. The little boy and girl I played with I can still remember in detail. The boy's name was Randy, and the girl we called Lily. Randy was light-skinned and had dark hair, while Lily had bright red hair and darker skin. I was dark-skinned and dark-haired. Physical attributes aside, both of them were very boisterous, and we all loved to run around and play until the sun started setting and my mom called me in. And then both of them would run back to their houses until the next time we were out to play. It was a sweet little friendship, and it was pretty normal, except for a few things. When we would draw with chalk, both Randy and Lily's favorite things to draw were these little symbols with random words after them. I now realize that those symbols were very close to some symbols I had seen, but for the life of me could not remember where. And I can remember some of the words they wrote having to do with terms that I still don't recognize. My mom would come out with juice boxes sometimes when we were drawing, and laugh at my friend's cute made-up language. One morning I went out to play with my friends, only to find them sitting on the curb, sulking. When I asked them why they were sad, they simply told me that they had to leave, and I quote, "Because we've got to get back to 2137. I asked them where that was, and they said it was later. They told me to sit right there and wait a minute so they could bring me something to remember them by. I did what they told me, and soon enough they had returned, bearing what I have chalked up to be the strangest gift I have been given to date. They were a little rainbow hairbrush that sparkled, a small, unmarked tube of what I was informed was lotion, and a small box that looked as though it was carved out of a gem. They handed me my gifts, which I promptly tried out, brushing my hair and using some of the lotion on my wrist, so they knew I wasn't going to just throw them aside. They hugged me before running back into their respective houses. My memory cuts out at this point, but the next thing I remember was waking up, sleepily rubbing my pale-skinned hands across my face to brush away my bright red hair, and going to ask my mom if Randy and Lily had left. My mother had no idea what I was talking about. Our neighbors had no children. She did not remember me being born with dark skin and dark hair. No one did. That was the day Randy and Lily disappeared from the face of the earth, leaving me with an unfamiliar, new appearance, a tube of hand lotion, a tiny comb, and a glittery little box that sits on my mantel to this day, and which I still have no idea how to open. When I was 18, my best friend called me very late one night at 1:43 in the morning. He left me a voicemail to call him back. I wasn't near my phone when he called. I called him back at 1:46 in the morning, but got his voicemail this time. He sounded distressed, like something was really wrong. I was concerned, but went to bed anyway. The next morning, I was at work and sitting in the middle of a staff meeting when I felt like I was about to throw up. I went to the bathroom and started heaving my guts out. I just assumed I had eaten something bad the previous night. I was doing outside sales at the time, so I left to go to my next appointment. I was driving along, and then my phone rang. It was one of my best friend's girlfriend, and she was crying uncontrollably. I couldn't understand her until I finally heard it. "John's dead." My best friend had been in a car accident the previous night and hit a semi-truck head-on while he was driving home. There are two things that to this day make it hard to sleep every time I think about it. The first is that the paramedics pronounced him dead at 1:43 a.m., the exact time of the missed call. The accident had to have happened at least 10 to 15 minutes prior. The other thing that was probably just a coincidence was me getting sick at my meeting.